Hi there, you have a gazillion of these too, don't you? Well, we're going to take those bright plastic Easter eggs and turn them into something really sweet and special. So let's get to that.
First, you'll need to seal your eggs closed. I found a thin tape worked best for me. You could use a masking tape if you cut it down the length. Then I burnish it with my fingernail to have as little texture as possible. But our next step will cover most of that. To coat your eggs for the look of concrete, mix a slurry of joint compound and water. I'm going to quickly show you 2 ways that I found worked for me. Pick what works best for you, of course. Here I discovered that if I start out holding the egg on a Dixie cup, it makes it easier to transfer once it's all lathered up. I spread the slurry on one side and let it dry overnight. Then sand that end and repeat it on the other end the next day. And with this method, it required 2 coats, so a couple of minutes for 4 days per egg. But then I discovered that if I thinned the slurry down even more to more like a glaze consistency rather than a frosting consistency, it worked much better for me anyway. I could dip one end of the egg in and let it dry overnight, and then just flip it over and dip the other end in. So 1 coat covered also in this way. So now my time was just 2 days involved rather than 4 days involved. And it was so simple. Look, even better, if you use foam eggs on a skewer, you can do the whole egg at once. So needless to say, for me going forward, I'm going with the glaze consistency and dipping my eggs. And now that the eggs are completely covered and they've dried overnight, it's time to sand them. You've heard me talk about this little wonder before. It's one of the most indispensable tools in my craft room. It's my detail sander, or a micro sander, sometimes called just a micro tool. It's a thick foam handle that is very comfortable to hold, and the sandpaper just velcros on. I started with a 120 grit paper and then finished with a 220. I'm using very little pressure here. I'm sanding with a circular motion, just taking off any big lumps, lines, or transition spots. And now I have a handcrafted concrete look egg. Never guess it started out as a bright plastic 2-part egg. Now it's time for the fun of adding our embellishments. The options are endless. You could even just finish them with any kind of cool paint treatment or wax treatment. I'm planning a coral and lavender colored tablescape, so I wanted my egg to be white but with a chalky finish. Here I'm using some dried lavender from my garden and some coral crewel embroidery wool that I had in my stash, as well as a soft lavender wax as my embellishments. Once I have everything arranged the way I like it, a little dab of Gorilla Glue held the lavender and wool twine in place while I made the wax seal. Because of the curve of the egg, I was concerned about the wax running off before I could stamp it. Man, sometimes it's a bummer to be right. So after a lot of trial and error, I found a system that worked. Start with a clean, flat tile or piece of glass, a thin scraper of some variety, your seal and a damp sponge, and the glue gun with your stick of sealing wax. Puddle enough sealing wax for the diameter of your stamp. With the stamp damp, gently press into your hot wax. It's more like gently placing it. The weight of mine was enough to make a good impression. Wait a second or two and pull straight up. Then while the wax is still warm, use your scraper to gently release it from the tile. Immediately hold it with your thumb and index finger on the left and right sides and gently squeeze it to bend it slightly like the curvature of your egg. Hold it for a bit to help it retain its shape. Now drop just a bit of hot wax on the glued area of the egg and place your seal. Press it down and hold it in place while it cools. You can certainly stop here, but I wanted to highlight the wax seal impression, and I used a white marker, and ever so lightly and gently I rubbed the side of the marker tip over the raised areas. I started light, and then when I felt like I needed to have a little bit more depth to it, I just went back over it and added a little bit more. It's easier to add than it is to take away, although I did find that if I needed to, I could wipe it off with a damp rag. I haven't tried it yet, but I think a little bit of rub and buff on a swab would work great and bring a real luxe look to a more formal wax seal uses, like holidays and weddings perhaps. I hope you are inspired to make over your bright plastic eggs and perhaps try a wax seal or two. Please follow me for more crafting and DIY projects and give this video a thumbs up. There are links below to the blog post and products I used.